where's that? Look at that.
I'm always wondering how it's.
Yeah, it was good.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming today and those online as well. So glad you could be here. I'm going to start with an opening prayer, the one I've been saying each week. Holy Spirit, lead us into the wilderness of this Lenten season. Test us, open us, free us. Guide us out of the wilderness into the bright future which God has planned for each of us and for this church. Amen. What I've done is I've been working on summarizing the chapters that I've taught or done so far. And I'm going to have the document completed so that when we send out the weekly e-blast, instead of roughly the book's right around 100 pages. And I left 2 chapters out. One is on social media, and I gave copies of that to Alicia and Jenny. And then there's a chapter on details on how to implement these kinds of things. But so what I'm going to do is out of each chapter, I will highlight a couple of things. And if you think it's too sparse, I have more text in the document, but for today's, for example, the first chapter was inward versus outward churches. And Tom Rainier provided 10 common traits of inwardly focused churches. So I'll read them without having any text, but when the document is, basically it'll be a PDF file that can be downloaded. So there's basically the 10 items are worship wars, prolonged minutiae meetings, focus, facility focus, program driven, inwardly focused budget, inordinate demands for pastoral care, attitudes of entitlement, greater concerns about change than about the gospel, anger and hostility, evangelical apathy. Now, if there's one that you say, geez, I don't remember that one, can you say more about it? There's text here that I could share with you. So we've just done the first chapter summary. So I will move on unless you guys stop me along the way. So, and Jill, someone's going to have to tell me if you raise your hand.
Jenny, she might be on with.
Oh, is Jenny on too? I
She
didn't
said
know.
she's driving,
Yeah.
so she's
Okay.
driving Josh home, but she
Can
was
she-
gonna do it.
can she-
Okay, okay.
But she
So
probably
chapter 1 was on inward versus outward churches. The second chapter is on why hospitality matters. And 2 key things that we learned during chapter 2's presentation were the 3-minute rule, which is basically, I'll say a few words about this one, encourage each person to spend just 3 minutes before and after worship service greeting those they do not know. And then the other one was the 10-foot rule. Encourage each person in the congregation to be attentive to people and the environment within 10 feet of them. And this time it wasn't just guests, but anybody within the 10-foot rule, just be, if you see somebody that looks lost or maybe haven't seen somebody who's been in worship for a while, say, hi, how you doing? So that was on chapter 2 that we focused. Not all of them are going to be that light, so to speak, but that was kind of the gist of chapter 2. On chapter 3, it was titled The Principles of Hospitality. And the Church of the Resurrection defines hospitality this way. Radical hospitality is a hospitality that goes beyond being friendly. It is welcoming guests with a warm openness and authenticity that significantly exceeds their expectations. And then they introduce 3 principles of radical hospitality, and they are offer personal attention. Notice, offer personal attention, and provide excellent follow-through. The first one is notice. And I believe there's 3 items under here. Yes, 3 items. The first one is offer a warm greeting to each guest you encounter, starting with the person right in front of you. The next one is be on the lookout for people who are alone or look lost for issues with the environment or facilities. And if you remember on that one, if there's a piece of paper on the floor, maybe you're using restroom and you kind of wipe down the countertop or something like that. Those were some of the examples. And then the third one was develop a defendable system for noticing and acknowledging guests. The next principle was offering personal attention. And I believe there were 6 on this one. The first one is introduce yourself and learn people's names. The second one is wear name tags and other identifying markers. Right now, we aren't wearing name tags, and that's something that we may want to do in the future. And I don't know if that implies that Zach each Sunday after worship or sometime during the week wipe all of the name tags clean, if you will, or not clean, but wipe them down. But at some point we may start wearing name tags again. And then the next one is practice the 10-foot rule and 3-minute rule. And basically that can be with members as well as guests. Introduce people to others. Look for opportunities to go the extra mile. And for example, it gives if someone asks for directions, maybe escort them. Anticipate and fulfill guests' needs. And one example I'll lift up is tissue during flu season. Now we have tissue pretty much all year round in all the pews, but that was an easy one to just share real quick. And then the third principle was provide excellent follow through. And basically it says, if you see a problem, own the process of finding the solution. And so basically it gave an example of, I'm trying to see if I can spot it real quick. The one I just gave, if you see there's water on the counter in the restroom, wipe it down. Or if you see some paper on the floor, that kind of thing. Search out answers to questions if there's no response in the moment. And it's okay to say, I don't know. And then basically, if you don't know, if you can respond with the question within that moment, or not that moment, but in a few minutes, you might say, let me just go check with Pastor. Or you might say something like, well, that's a spiritual life item, and Barb's Finley's over there. Let me take you to Barb's Finley. I'm just going to kind of give you examples. And then the last one is hospitality changes lives. And I'm just going to read what it says. There's a couple of sentences that I thought were really good. When we live into the principles of radical hospitality, we give people a taste of the kingdom of God by showing that we are anticipating and ready for the guests, that they are welcome and accepted, that we welcome their physical manifestation of Christ's love and welcome for those who come. And so that kind of really grabbed me, for lack of a better word. Now we're moving into chapter 5, providing an excellent in-person experience. There's a section of the chapter that says Richard Birch has 5 emotions for the first time guest experience. So I'm going to read what the 5 are and then a short narrative for each one. Fear. They have an internal dialogue that makes them put up their guard. They wonder, will I be judged? What if I look out of place? What if I don't know what to do? The next one is confusion. If the guest has difficulty finding bathrooms or where they take their kids, it can be a roadblock. It's disoriented, not knowing where to go. The next one is regret. This emotion is like buyer's remorse. The fourth one is hope. This is the driving force that brings guests to church. And the last one is distraction. This is everything else that can happen in their lives and every distraction they encounter at church. And the goal is to move the distractions. I don't know if there's any comments or questions as I'm going along. Please stop me from going, but I know your time is valuable, so I'm going to try and keep going unless you have a question or a comment. Let's explore examples of the impact your guests have from the moment they step on property. So the first thing is the outdoor signage. And I remember during that session, we talked a little bit about that. We do have a sign outside of our church, and we have some signs as you come in. We do have our guest handicap parking in the parking lot, both in front of the church and in the back of the church. The next thing it gets into is the parking lot. And basically it says your guest's decision whether to return is influenced by their experience studying in the parking lot. Physical space, the appearance of your property matters. And I think we really work hard to try and make sure we keep our outside property physically in good shape. And inside, I think Zach is doing a good job with trying to help keep things snappy and sharp. Indoor signage, we've worked on that, and maybe there's some other ways we can improve on that. And then it suggests coffee. It suggested maybe having a refreshment station. In the narthex, it didn't use the term narthex, but that's the term. I don't know what else. It's not a gathering area per se, because that's more like the fellowship hall. Children's space, it really makes a point to say the space should be bright and cheerful, not to mention clean and fresh smelling. And then the worship experience, and basically talks about, this is the point of entry into worship. It's not so much the worship, because it deals with that in a little bit later on, but the worship experience. And it talks about mostly the greeters in that section. And then the worship space, we constantly remind our ushers that their job is primarily hospitality. This is the church that the authors are from. They also are on the front line of noticing people in need. And it gave an example in the chapter about somebody who stayed in worship after the service was over, and they asked the pastor to go in and talk to them. And then your attendees, they asked members to park farther away and move from where the good spots are, visitor spots are, and move to the center of their own worship. And then there's the actual worship service, and it talks about the planning, how the planning is important, and also how and I added in there Larry editorial, the tech team upstairs, which is right now Lee and then Julie is our plan, and then Mike up there is up there too, and is part of the tech team. And then right now we have the worship team, and we've expanded it by one. It's Pastor Brenda, Pat, and I, and Jenny has started to join us. And anybody else is welcome to join us at any time. You may say, maybe I only want to participate for like Lent or Advent, or maybe I want to participate if we do something with the youth ministry or the children, and that's okay to only participate for 1 or 2 sessions if you have that desire. The next chapter is intentional follow-up. This is chapter 6. Radical hospitality ensures that whatever the reasons for coming, they have a great experience. And it says the first goal should be simply to get the first guest to come back. And it says in order to facilitate those process connections, we have to be intentional about how we do it. And they have 3 areas of effective follow-up: prompt, personal, and pleasant. So under prompt, Bill Eason says that basically follow up within 24 hours. He had an 85% likely chance that guests would return. So they say the longer that you let that go, the less likely that you'll get someone to follow up. Personal, make a personal connection. A person-to-person interaction is the most effective and engaging to guests. And this is one, I suppose, I'm going to digress or go off on a tangent. I'm finding more and more they want you to do everything online. or when you call in, you can't get to a person, they either refer you to the website, or they say, press, if you want to know how much your bill is, do this. If you want to know, pay a bill, do this. And this is the part that I don't like about the technology. There, the Walmart that we're here in Lockport is getting ready, I think, to add a lot more self-checkouts and have fewer cashiers. Whereas a part of me that gets mad is a justice issue from the standpoint of eliminating jobs. And I know I'm digressing because it's my personal opinion.
And eliminating service.
Yes.
That's the worst part.
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry.
A TPERC member is very
Jobs are
observant.
important, but service is more important.
Yes.
That really bothers.
I'm going to Jewel.
And from people want people.
Well,
Don't
yeah,
forget
and
about
you
that.
interact.
Yeah.
Well, it's also how much stuff you have in your cart. Like I know I'll go to a person because I usually have a decent amount of stuff. Those small
Yeah.
checkouts are hard to work with.
Yeah. And it looks like maybe I'm not the only one that has a hot button on this one.
Right about that.
That's tough when you have a lot of stuff. Because, there's no room for it.
And I'm sorry.
There, something that came up today, just kind of a practical thing, and I know we talked about having that relationships are very important amongst each other. New people coming through the door, people we're getting to know or learning about us. Those relationships are at the core of it. So, prime example, and I'll just share this. You may have noticed Neil and Judy Barker here today. So I haven't talked with them in depth in years. So just spent a good 20 minutes talking with them. For me, and my question is, we talked about the past. I really like talking with those folks. How do you, in that instance, for example, they're maybe returning, periodically, or their status, but how do you bridge that gap? By hi, how are you? How's family? How's is there anything the church can do for you, or is there any? That's the part that I struggle with. Or a new person, for example, you get to know them, talk with them. Oh, hope to come back next week, but just having that formal, process, Pastor would obviously be involved, but any suggestions there? I know it was a long question, but or any thoughts? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one of the things, I never ask a person's name. Well, I won't say never, but I really work hard to never ask a person's name without first giving my name. And then I ask their name. Hi, my name, I'm Pastor Brenda. May I ask your name? The other thing is, if it's a brand new person, how did you hear about us? How did you find us? And then you could also take the next step by maybe venturing into what were you looking for? With the Barkers, you might say, I'm so glad to see you again. What brought you back? Because I'm really glad to see you again, and we hope you keep coming. What brought you back? If it's too nosy, they'll tell you.
Mike.
And one thing I found too, in my work, I'm trying to meet people. We have a great common experience that just comes through with the pandemic. So that's always a place, particularly with strangers. We talked about experiences, how they're doing right now, what their opinions are, what the future is. And it's a common thing we don't often have. So it's a negative we could turn into a positive right now for a while.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. Did that help at all?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
And in the book, it says don't overwhelm them. And so, we shouldn't have 6 people surround, the Barkers, for example.
But it's different with the Barkers because they're a known entity.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to be as offended if you ask a more personal question.
Sure.
With a brand new person, you have to feel that a little differently.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's a good point. Okay, I pushed the hot button and look, we had some good conversation in the process. Okay, the next one is pleasant. Design your follow-up to make your guests feel welcome and comfortable. Ensure it's not intrusive or unpleasant to your guest. And Pastor Brenda touched on that, so that's good. So now we're going to get into the follow-up process. First, it says establish a reliable method of identity of your guests and how many times they visited. And we do have a servant keeper that has two functions. One is the financial function. So your giving goes through servant keeper, and that's the part that Elaine does. And so basically with that system, she enters all the giving that we all give. And then she issues the quarterly statements that she sends out. And then there's another module within servant keeper called attendance. And I believe Alicia's doing that. And I think for a while Audie was doing that, and probably with.
Dolores is doing it.
Dolores,
There's been money. You've been doing it, right?
No, no.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's been-
And,
Well, Doris tried to teach me.
and
Just want to give you credit.
I don't know if there's a expert on servant keeper on the module about attendance, but it may have some canned reports, but it may also have some reports where if you spend a little time, you can create a report. Usually the newer software has functions that allow you to create reports relatively easily. It's just a matter of putting certain identified pieces of information together into a report and then setting some criteria on what you're looking for. But we have something that's at least a diamond in the rough, for lack of a better way of saying it. Everything I do from this point on is going to be at the author's church. At the author's church, there are follow-up milestones and guest first, third, and fifth visit to worship service. So this is a summary of all of the follow-up process in addition to guest follow-up. But the first one is guest follow-up. First-time guests, they receive a brief text message, a hand-delivered coffee mug, and a letter from the senior pastor. Now that's a function of having that information to do it with. If you don't get a cell phone number or an address, you can't send a text or deliver a mug or a letter from the pastor. So if when we pass the attendance pads, they provide that information, then we have a point of entry, if you will, to do one of these. It goes on to say that most of the time, not all three of these are done to every guest member because they don't provide enough information to do all three. And so, but to the extent that they provide that information, another part of the book, it says, if they start coming on a regular basis, they parse out the information that they'll give. And so maybe later on you get some additional information. Now it goes into a lot more information about what they do with the first-time guests, but I'm not going to get into that kind of detail here. When I send this document out, I think it's going to be about 12 pages. Basically, if you want to see more detail, like for this, you can see what it is, but it's still less than the book. It's not 100 pages either. So. Now, the third-time guest is when a guest has visited 3 times within 12 weeks. So whenever that happens, they do some things. And I'm not going to get into the details of what goes on at that particular point in time. And then the 5th time a guest visits. And that criteria is if the guest has attended 5 times within 1 year. And so if it happens in 2 months, that's the 5th visit. If it happens in 5 months, that's the 5th time the guest visits. So that function of time may vary from person to person. But when that happens, basically they get an invitation, a personal invitation to an event called Coffee with the Pastor, which is a 2-hour event where they hear about the senior pastor's personal testimony and learn more about what they believe at that church and the expectations of its members. And I think it gets into that later. Yeah, so I'm not going to say anything more about that at this point. But so anyway, that's a 2-hour event, and that's where they're introduced, considered becoming a member. Okay, the next one is the membership. And basically it says the goal of membership is to grow toward deeper levels of participation and involvement in God's work in the world. At Coffee with the Pastor, where the authors are on staff, we explain the 5 expectations of membership. And the senior pastor, Pastor Adams, wrote a book called The Walk, and there are 5 expectations. And one is their study the scriptures, worship every week, And it says in person whenever possible, if not, basically online. Serve in and out of church, give, and then share. And then I introduced, and this is the one we did last week, and Pastor picked up on it too. It's almost exactly the same as 6 Marks of Discipleship from Power Surge. Pray daily, worship weekly, read the Bible, serve in the church, relationship to encourage spiritual growth, and then give. So this book, I kind of find it neat when you find books on different topics have some common themes. And so this is a common theme in hospitality book and in Power Surge. And then they have what they call member follow-up. And basically it says a new member survey goes out within 24 hours of the coffee with the pastor. And it gives them an opportunity to register and learn some more options. And then there's a constant focused follow-up for the first 12 months. They send out emails, special emails to the new member. And then on their 1-year anniversary, they get some kind of a handwritten note expressing congratulations on their anniversary of being a member a year. Then they have one that they call a Reconnection Follow-Up. And a member who's missed 4 consecutive weeks of worship is reached out to by some volunteers to find out, is everything okay with just saying we missed you? It's not very confrontational. It's not like shame on you, you're gonna go to hell, anything like that. And so it's just a light tap on the shoulder, we missed you. And sometimes they find out that there's a need. And then there's the lapsed member mailing. Each August, we send a letter to the people who have gone all summer and haven't attended worship. It simply says we missed you, and highlights the fall ministry kickoffs. And there are people who can do things. We not necessarily go, but at least in both of these documents, and both Power Surge and in this document earlier, it says do it online. Streaming. If you missed the streaming, you can go back to a recorded Sunday and see it. So if COVID hasn't done anything else for us, there were churches doing streaming and recording of worship before COVID, but COVID has forced more churches to get into that, make that leap, if you will. And so it's, even if you're on vacation in Europe, you can still go and watch the service. And then there's the inactive member. Each January, we send an email to all the members who have not attended or made a financial gift for 12 months. So if somebody hasn't attended worship in a year or hasn't made a gift in 12 months, it basically says, do you still want to be a member? And then there's a closing paragraph, and I'll just lift up one of the sentences. Let your actions demonstrate your desire to make every person, guest, member, and wanderer feel freedom and welcome into the community. If people are going to experience God's kingdom anywhere, it ought to be through the church. Now, this is the new chapter for today. It's a short one. It's called Equipping the Congregation. It is the authors, Debbie Nixon and Yvonne Gentile, hope that through this book, I'm going to say workshop, you have discovered ideas to help develop practices where guests receive exceptional and consistent hospitality in your ministry context. Yet creating better systems will not make the difference. The difference is the attitude and heart of the leaders. The difference is the attitude and heart of the volunteers. The difference is the attitude and heart of the congregation who commits to go above and beyond to love and care for others. This attitude and heart reflect a church whose culture declares that radical hospitality is a non-negotiable value. And that's basically where the rubber hits the pavement. A congregation that shares and models the values placed on hospitality is just as important as the committed volunteers who welcomes your guests. So basically, it's not just the volunteers who take on these different functions, it's the whole congregation basically being excited about, your faith journey and wanting to share it and wanting to grow in that process and be transformed. They at the Church of the Resurrection are not perfect and don't always get it right, but they are committed to evaluation, feedback, and making changes for the better. At regular meetings, they talk about what is going well, determine if there are any ways to improve, and recall their values as a reminder that this is why they exist. So any good organization is always looking to reinvent itself, and they do that by, as they said, evaluation, feedback, and we have a process called SWOT, which I didn't know anything about, but I know Pastor introduced it, but Stephanie in your job must have been used SWOT. Off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank. No, I can't remember.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Thank you. Okay. I got some brain freeze. The leaders must continually set an expectation of hospitality and model it. That's what one of the functions of a leader is. You got to model the expectations that you want the body to be follow. When you have leaders who do not only cast a vision, when you have leaders who do not cast a vision but model the vision of the way they lead. I probably wrote this too fast because it's not making any sense. Basically, you gotta walk the talk and walk the walk, and doing it while no one else is looking. Great things will happen and others will follow. And that's when you know it's part of your DNA, for lack of a better way, if you're doing it when no one else is looking. The next topic is staying on course within this chapter. Early in establishing the radical hospitality ministry, a congregant was overheard asking a visitor to move because the visitor had sat in their seats. When the senior pastor was made aware of this occurrence, the very next.
Go ahead. I've been drinking the whole
That doesn't make any difference. Huh? Okay. My buddy Lee. Okay. The very next Sunday from the pulpit, he told the congregation that this is not the kind of church we are. We don't have reserved seats. He shared his expectation. This was never to happen again. It was bold and direct, yet compassionate, as he reminded the church of their mission and purpose. We don't want to have any barriers that would prevent someone from encountering Christ, but instead we want to be a bridge. Remember, culture is not only what you create, but what you allow to happen. And an inwardly focused congregation is a visible sign of unhealthy behavior that has been tolerated far too long. And then the third one is changing hearts and minds. While coaching a church in a rural area, one of the action steps we recommended was to implement a parking lot ministry where a volunteer was present in the parking lot to greet guests when they arrived. There was initial resistance because the church had not welcomed any visitors in quite some time. So having a volunteer in the parking lot to greet the members seemed unnecessary. We, however, encouraged that the church start the parking lot ministry and practice for when the first visitor would arrive, knowing from our experience that something transformational would occur. And it did. The simple experience of being greeted by a person weekly in the parking lot began to change the hearts and behaviors of the members. Everyone loves a smile, a welcome, a handshake. And eventually, when a visitor did arrive, each of the members was prepared to extend radical hospitality that was not coerced or perfunctory. It flowed from the transformed hearts. For volunteers who own and live out radical hospitality, they have observed it is a blessing that uplifts the heart as well as those who they assist. And then the last topic is ambassadors for Christ. And this one kind of caught me off guard when I in this part of this chapter. When looking at the best in class of creating an exceptional guest experience for businesses and for churches have ever done it, no one's ever done it better than fill in the blank. Who do you think it is? We've all been there at some point. There's one in California and one in Florida.
Oh, Disney.
Yep.
Or Disneyland.
The Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, that's true. They are very focused on it.
Creating exceptional guest experience is the foundation of culture at Disney. In the book, The Experience, the authors share Disney's focus and intentionality on equipping what they call ambassadors to be part of the mission. The word ambassador was carefully chosen, coming from the Latin word meaning to go on a mission. The author describes the mission as what happens when an experience that is valued and shared both internally and externally is cultivated. The mission is to empower others to be conduits of the experience in Disney's kingdom and to go out and share the story. Disney knows that ambassadors must be developed. We must be developing our congregation to be ambassadors of the good news. That's capital G, capital N. The church's mission is to be ambassadors of God's kingdom work. We are to be witnesses to God's redemptive work in the world with the greatest story in the world to share. In John 3:16, we read, God so loved the world, he gave us his only son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. The promise from the resurrection story. God has chosen us, the church, to be conduits, ambassadors, to share the story of God's love, not just in word, but by actions and deeds toward others. We are loved by God. We are redeemed by God. When we develop a lifestyle of hospitality, it becomes a way to share what Christ has done in our lives with others. As a congregation, we must be outward-facing, humble, and hospitable to all. The Lord's Prayer is a powerful kingdom vision prayer. When we pray, we recognize God is inviting us as conduits, as ambassadors to move beyond our own comfort to help fulfill the kingdom's mission on earth. Practicing radical hospitality as an art, it requires the consciousness, use of skill, and experience shaped by radical hospitality we have received from Jesus. When our church, our congregation, is truly transformed by the radical hospitality, we can help to welcome the stranger, and in this, we join God's kingdom mission. The end. Any comments or questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Back in where you were saying the church, after 5 times that a person had visited, that they were asked to join the minister for 2 hours. Now, in my case, visiting 5 times, I was probably coming, almost every Sunday. But I can see people who are not churched feeling like you're pushing them into joining the church. I wanted to join the church. I was looking definitely for a church. But I can see somebody who maybe, if they come every week for, 5 weeks, or they come 5 times in, 3 or 4 or 5 months. If they're brand new to the church, being, almost forced to join,
Well,
if it's only that time.
what I forgot to say, and I think I said it in past sessions, is do everything in context. And so as this is something they've developed over years. And I know today I said, then they continually reevaluate. And so I would say you do that kind of thing in context. If somebody's coming every week, it might be that they're looking for a church, but it might be, for example, somebody who's been to another UCC church. and maybe even active, I'll pick on Mark, because Mark, when he came here, he had served as moderator in the past church. And I know Stephanie, like me, is an ex-Catholic, so I don't know at what point you became a UCC, or for lack of a better way of saying it. Here. Okay. So, Mark and Stephanie came here. Mark was real familiar with the UCC, but Stephanie probably wasn't, just like I wasn't when I first became involved. And so it's a matter of, do everything in context. This church has a geographical context. We have a cultural context as well. And so, and then as we get to know it, when we bring in guests and we get to know them a little better, we can decide as leadership what's appropriate for that particular couple. For example, under the old model, we would do something like maybe 2 or 3 times a year. We would have an opportunity where we would gather people considering membership and spend a couple hours. There was a time when there was 3 Sundays you had to go. I'm going way back on that one. I didn't grow up in the church, but Pat's the only one. You didn't grow up in the church either, did you? You came from another one too, didn't you?
When I was 9.
Okay.
She grew up in
She
a
grew
I'm
up-
sorry.
I was 11 months old.
Okay.
Larry, speaking to Barb's point, I understand what you're saying. But now, and I guess going back to kind of what you said, when I first started coming here, I mean, I'd grown up in a congregational church that didn't join UCC,
Okay.
and then had gone to UCC churches and so on. But when I started coming here, they did have, they'd say, okay, we're having a new members class if you're interested. So maybe we don't have to say, okay, you gotta come 5 times or whatever, but, have an opportunity for people to join. And it was a meeting with the pastor, so I don't know if we have a problem.
Well, the way it was worded, it just sounded like,
Yeah, well, of course,
Karen hasn't come.
yeah, you
No,
also,
he didn't mean it. Yeah, I know. but-
you also have the opportunity to say, no, I'm not interested.
Right,
Yes.
right.
And that was the point I was gonna make, is that they send an invitation, and
Right.
they didn't tell us how many people respond to the invitation every time.
Right.
That, they didn't put everything in the book. And what do they do if somebody still keeps coming after 5 weeks, but doesn't come to the meeting with the pastor? They didn't tell us that either.
No.
But you don't have to, say yes and go to the meeting with the pastor.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear everything? Jenny and Jill, can you hear everything pretty good? Can you hear everything? Okay.
So they know what we're talking about.
Can you talk a little bit louder, Mindy, please?
Okay, I was just wondering, do we have, and I think we did many years ago, have like the history of our actual church, and and also some of the beliefs of the what the congregational church is and the UCC and that. I don't know if we have.
She has the history, and then there
I
is
know
a
she
UCC book that I got that from Eric.
When
So I
we-
know there's a book out there for about,
When
There are
we,
some.
yeah.
when we
I'm sure.
used to do
I like the one I got.
the invitations like Phyllis was talking about,
I
part of that used to be describing, there used to be a big thing that talked about, Jesus was born, and then how the many denominations got down to 4, and then got down to finally 2 each, and then down to 1. And that was part of it, that was usually. So
that's what I'm kind of getting at, what
Yes.
denomination of where we came from
Yeah.
in that, because I mean, some, they did, oh, you're congregationalist, well, what's that? Oh, but what's that denomination of, or in that?
Can I tell you something that's a secret really for church people? People who have never been to church don't care. They don't care about the denomination at
Right,
all.
for people who don't, right.
Yeah, so the 67% of people who have never been to church, they don't care. They don't know what congregational is. It confuses them. Now, I'm not saying that because I want to take the word congregational out of the name of the church. I'm just telling you, that's the truth of where we are today. It
Okay,
used to be denominations mattered,
right.
and to some of us, it still does matter. But to the vast majority of people who have never been to church, they don't care. The only thing they care about is, am I being treated well, and am I learning about God?
But to Randy's point, those that have been to church and maybe were Methodist or Presbyterian or whatever, it does make a difference. So
Yeah.
we probably need something to offer that for those that are previously church or whatever you want to call them. You know, so that there are two groups that we're talking about possibly.
And also how our how we minister and how we do other things in it. Because I know, like me and Larry, we both came from being Catholic. Thank you. I lost my both from being Catholic, where a lot of things were done very different in it. Even going to who can accept the sacraments in that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and what our beliefs are about the sacraments in that. I mean, that's another thing that I was kind of talking about. But you're saying most people nowadays don't even know.
I'm not
anything
saying it's
like
not
that.
important to share what we believe. That's very important. I'm just saying people from outside who've never been to church, they don't know Presbyterian from Catholic, from
Right,
UCC, from non-denom. They don't know.
Okay.
They're either Christian or not Christian.
That's right.
That's all they know.
Right.
Or like the military, they only had three: Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. That's it. That's all there is.
Well, I mean, that kind of is a high
I'm not
level.
all the time, I'm going down the process route right now.
Jill's got her-
I'm sorry, Joe?
No, that does help sometimes when you're, because when we used to be in session together and even communion, like you were saying, Randy, I mean, I remember seeing a pregnant person a couple rows behind me and I heard her ask her husband, do you think this is wine? Do you think this is grape juice? You know, she goes, I better not take it communion because I don't know what it is. And I turned around and said, it is grape juice. This church doesn't use wine, they use grape juice. So, I mean, sometimes you do have to put a little disclaimer or a little, you know, just so they feel comfortable and they know, you know, if they can participate in something or not. So that is helpful. I mean, Pastor, I understand what you're saying. A lot of people don't care what denomination, but I can't tell you how many people say UC, United Church of Christ, what is that? You know, and if you're like evangelical, merged with the Reform and they're congregational, you know, that means nothing to them. So maybe that is kind of nice to have a one sheet bar, you know, if you have a bullet point, you know, like we have a flyer or something. This is us. This is our history.
Thank you, Joe. What I'm gonna suggest we do, when I send this out in the weekly e-blast, I'm basically gonna say, print this up if you'd like to know a little bit more about what this workshop was about. I asked the leadership and the ministries to maybe look at some of these things and maybe through the discussion of their monthly meetings that they think about, can we implement any of this? Can we adapt it to this particular faith community? And I think if I haven't learned anything else from this book is, and this is something I'm guilty of a lot, is be in the moment. Listen, watch, and if you see somebody that has a question, that answer it. And you don't preach, you know, for example, if Randy says, I'd really like to know more about the chronology of how you became the United Church of Christ, I'd probably say something like, well, we can't do it here, Randy, but why don't you and I go out for lunch sometime for a cup of coffee? And I can gather some materials to meet your specific need. And so adaptability, flexibility, and just, yes, I'm really working at that. I think I got lazy now.
You were doing great the whole time.
Adaptability, flexibility, and just, you know, you involve the five senses, listen, watch, you know, each of us has like a sixth sense that sometimes we can see the way somebody's walking, the way, the tone of their voice. Body language can really speak if you're in the moment. If like when I'm presenting, if I'm so caught up, I've got the clock and it's going to go off in 60 minutes. Sometimes I get what do you call it, tunnel vision, and I'm guilty of that sometimes. But you know, let's be adaptive, pay attention, and basically do anything and everything we can to meet the people within reason, within people's needs and requests in terms of what could be done. And you know, how do we involve them? I know when I worked with young people, I would always, sometimes they'd ask a question, and if I knew the answer, I'd say, well, tell me what you think, you know, because, and then this is what I think, and maybe we can find some common ground, and maybe we can, in the process of working with you, sometimes I've learned more from them than I think maybe I had to share, because they had some really questions that that kind of caught me off guard. And sometimes I'd say, look, maybe we're going to have to ask Pastor on this one. And so and that's okay. And some, you know, if Pastor doesn't know, I'm sure he or she, they'll look to find an answer. Yes.
You know, along what you're saying, one of our nieces, she's mid-30s and primarily has been raised in the Catholic Church. That's where she's most familiar. But in the past couple of years, is not happy and looking for another church. And so it's been interesting to listen to her and to know how to respond, because she's of course asking us a lot, and how do we direct her. And now she's been visiting the church, I think maybe 3 to 5 times. I don't know if she's gotten a mug yet, but I'll have to ask her about that. But you know, we're very much wanting to know, what's the theology? Is it denominational? I mean, we're, you know, trying to you know, I guess, you know,
Without her knowing it. Yeah.
but I think we've been pretty good to not really say much of anything, to just ask her questions, you know, what is attracting you? And she's not giving us really many specifics. And I get the impression it's all about a feeling. She has a feeling about this church. And, you know, and I don't know if she's actually said, I feel good, but I think it's pretty much a feeling. So if we can learn anything, you know, from you know, those kinds of experiences.
Phyllis?
Well, and it's not only just the history and the theology. My children went to a Lutheran school for a while, and Kim was in 8th grade, and so they automatically had prepared them for confirmation there in 8th grade. And she was also going to confirmation at our church, which was the UCC church. And when they got to the place where the kids were going to be confirmed, they asked her, because they realized she was going to the other, you know, a different church, where she was going to be confirmed. And she said, well, at the UCC church, of course, my mom's on the board and she gets to vote. Here you don't. And I mean, she says, women are non-entities here. So some of this needs also to be, people maybe need to be aware of, especially if they're women.
Yes. Definitely.
Yeah, I attended, when I wasn't coming here for about 6 years, I attended a church that had a Baptist background. And they're very much the men. And
And you don't get a vote because your husband is the voter.
right.
But if you're divorced, it means your whole family is. Or widowed or whatever. But I mean, look here at how many women we have.
Right.
And only you guys would get a vote.
So most of the people that have visited here, since I've been here, have been people who were familiar with the UCC. That's why they came here. We did have a couple of families who came, And I wonder if we had had a rainbow in our bulletin around open and affirming, if they would have stayed, if they noticed that. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to expand upon that, that's why the post is out there, but to most people, and I'll say most, especially gay and lesbian people, they don't know what open and affirming means. You might as well be talking Greek. It just, that doesn't mean, no,
Yeah.
because they don't know what that means.
They just don't know.
They haven't been to
Right,
church.
they don't know the term because it's
They don't
not.
know the term. That's
Yeah.
kind of a UCC term.
What's worse is every denomination has a different term.
Right. Or
The
same.
United Methodist Church is something else, not
Yeah.
open and affirming. The Lutheran Church is something else, not
So,
open and affirming.
That universal symbol, at least for the LGBTQ, whatever, is an important thing.
But some
To
people
show.
don't know that we are liberal.
Right.
That too,
Um,
right.
And so if they saw or once they figured out we were liberal, they might not have come back. And that's okay, because we're not their theology.
Right.
Yeah. I'm gonna bring this session to a close, if that's okay with everybody. I'm gonna bring the session to a close. I think he's having too much fun doing this. Either that or he's trying to say, let's go out for a beer afterwards. Pastor, would you close us in prayer, please?
Sure. Thank you, God, for being present with us throughout this workshop and learning about hospitality, radical hospitality, and thinking about how we can modify the culture of this church to help more people find you by becoming part of this church. Help us to be better disciples so that we meet people and introduce them to this church and tell them about what the UCC stands for. Give us the courage to do that by the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Welcome.
Thank you, Larry. Hey,
God
Jill.
Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Jill.
I'm gonna close it down, okay?
Bye.
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 Okay.
Thanks for